Hi, everybody. It's your friend Cindy, also known as Cynthia Jordan, the author. We are doing a big musical in San Angelo this summer, and I am very excited to introduce to you Richard Brantley, who is an expert on the Santa Rita #1. And he has agreed to do an interview for us today. This is a picture of the Santa Rita #1 on June 10th when 1,000 people went to go see it. So Richard, what we're going to do right now is why don't you go ahead and bring up your slideshow.
Okay.
And I'm just going to let you take it away. Tell us the story of the Santa Rita #1.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, Sandy, for the opportunity to celebrate this centennial year of Santa Rita, and it was great to visit with you and meet you very recently. So I appreciate your work. And so with that, we'll just kind of look at the Santa Rita well. And again, this is the 100th anniversary, May 28th, 1923 was when the well was discovered. But we'll roll through a few of these slides. There's not a lot, but just kind of give you a little bit of history about university lands and the serendipitous, blessings of this well and what it caused to happen across the Permian Basin. But I don't think it would be appropriate to start this tale without describing a little bit of the historical ambitions that the Republic of Texas had and later the state of Texas had. But as we all may know, the Republic of Texas existed between 1836 and 1846. And in that time, a gentleman named Mirabeau Lamar was afterwards the second president of the Republic of Texas, but he had come from the east and had lost his family to illness back over in Georgia. And the lure of Texas, kind of drew him this way. He enlisted in Sam Houston's Republic of Texas Army, and he was an educated individual and a described poet. But he later became known as the father of Texas education because of his huge advocacy. Now, if you think about this just a little bit, back in those days, it was not uncommon for people not to know how to read or to write. Mirabeau Lamar was an educated individual and obviously persuasive because within 2 years, he was running Sam Houston's Republic of Texas Army. In fact, if you go to the rotunda of the state capitol, you'll see these big paintings, and one of them depicts when the Army brought in Santa Anna, Sam Houston, who had been injured, he's laying prostrate on a mat, and Mirabeau Lamar is standing there next to him. So he was a very influential individual, and as I said, he was a strong advocate for education. In fact, as he was the second president of the Republic in 1839, now Texas had a lot of land, as a republic, but they didn't have any money. And the same for statehood when that came along. But he designated 50 leagues of land, which is just a little over 280,000 acres of land to support higher education back in as early as 1839. But this quote that you see here, I think is one of the most amazing things. If we look back, it says, "The cultivated mind is the guardian genius of democracy, is the only dictator that free man acknowledges, is the only security that free man desires." And, I've gone to the GLO, Cindy, and looked at a lot of historical artifacts down there. And these beautiful manuscript handwritings that people and some people in those days had. And they describe it to me that if you had the capacity to, write a sentence and create those flourishes like that with the written word, your social status just, was elevated beyond most common men. So I just think it's a neat part of the story to start with. A few more historical facts. Again, 1839, they set aside 50 leagues of land. This was all in North Texas. This land was in North Texas around Paris, Texas, Sherman, Lamar County, actually. But then when statehood came along, Texas was the 28th state to join the Union. Formerly part of Mexico, the only state in the Union that was, previously its own country. And And so it moved forward, in statehood. It was not almost 30 years later that we got a constitution. It was actually the seventh constitution that Texas is governed by. But in 1876, the Constitution of Texas, the state constitution, was established. And again, advocation for higher education for all the same reasons. And the Constitution actually sets aside 1 million acres for the benefit of higher education. And it describes the University of Texas and Texas A&M in the Constitution. And then in 1883, the legislature of its own decided to give another 1 million acres to the benefit. Now, it's just all under the rule and control of the Board of Regents. And, some things that are notable there, if you think about that span of time between 1845 and 1876, there was a big event that happened in the United States called the Civil War, from about 1859 to 1865. And that 50 leagues of land was in North Texas, a lot of uncertainty in that 30-year window of time. And so when Texas, started looking at this again in 1878, actually is when they sent a surveyor to find this land. Really, the only unoccupied land was in West Texas. And so they weren't going to kick people off of homesteads, and perhaps some of that land had been sold. It's a little bit uncertain to me. But go to West Texas, find land out of the sovereign of the state, and set that out for the benefit of higher education. Now, another very prophetic statement here is I've got on the page here. Asheville Smith was a medical doctor. He was the first chairman of the Board of Regents in 1881 when UT was dedicated. And so I just read this statement here. It says, Texas holds embedded in its earth, rocks, and minerals, which now lie idle because unknown, resources of incalculable industrial utility, of wealth and power. Smite the earth, smite the rocks with the rod of knowledge, and fountains of unstinted wealth will gush forth. That's a pretty amazing thing to think that somebody could, virtually 40 years before the Santa Rita well was even thought about, would say something like this. But certainly there were coal mines across, the United States, and there was obviously knowledge about this, but I think it's a very, prophetic statement. So just again, a little bit of a timeline, and Cindy, be sure to ask me any questions that arise. You know your audience, and you know what they might be interested in. But just a little timeline as we kind of look from left to right. Again, Mirabeau Lamar and the 50 leagues, and then the state constitution, the additional legislative set aside, and then roll up to 1923 when the oil was discovered at the Santa Rita well on the permanent university fund lands. In 1929, after the discovery, the legislature created what we call the Board for Lease. The Board for Lease is a second board which is chaired by the Texas Land Commissioner, currently Don Buckingham, and they oversee that Don Buckingham and 2 UT regents and 1 A&M regent oversee and certify and approve the mineral leases. Okay, the surface is all under the oversight of the University of Texas Board of Regents, but then the mineral leases are approved by that board. And then in 2014, after horizontal drilling had erupted here in West Texas and the unconventional shale plays, then the board established what we describe as the University Land Advisory Board, which is a board that we meet with on a quarterly basis, and they advise and guide. It's not a governing board, but it's certainly oil industry professionals, and have a lot of insights here. So as we move forward, again, we all know what we're here for, to celebrate this great discovery. And on the next slide, Cindy, I've got a video that I'd love to play for you here, and it gives you a perspective about the benefits that Texas has.
From the beaches and wetlands of the Gulf Coast to the painted mountains of West Texas and Big Bend, to the modern urban centers that help power our 21st century economy. Texas has many unique treasures that propel its people forward. And this is a story about a Texas treasure that powers Texas in more ways than one: the university lands. Our tale begins all the way back in 1838, when the independent Republic of Texas was led by its second president, Mirabeau Lamar. A lawyer and self-styled poet, Lamar urged the Republic of Texas Congress to set aside assets to fund a vast system of education that would help ensure a bright future for the fledgling country. And while the fledgling republic's finances were precarious, Texas did have one asset in droves: vast amounts of wide open spaces, land. Lamar's vision wasn't realized until 1876, when the new state of Texas Constitution called for the creation of the University of Texas and appropriated 1 million acres of West Texas land for this purpose. Using this land grant as its catalyst, the Constitution also established the Permanent University Fund, or PUF, and these 1 million acres became forever known as the Constitutional Million. State leaders added an additional 1 million acres to the university lands in 1883, the same year that UT Austin officially opened with a single building. UT quietly grew over its first 40 years, and then things accelerated roughly 100 years ago. The turning point was May 28, 1923 to be exact, when a well on university lands, named Santa Rita No. 1 after the patron saint of long shots and lost causes, struck oil, setting off a series of major discoveries that ultimately resulted in the development of the Permian Basin oil field. As oil flowed from Santa Rita No. 1, revenue fed into the PUF and sparked new development for the university in the 1920s and 30s, as 23 buildings went up to create the core of the Austin campus, including the iconic UT Tower. In 1931, the Texas legislature added Texas A&M as a PUF beneficiary and authorized a split in net income from PUF investments that still exists today, with UT receiving 2/3 of the funds and Texas A&M receiving 1/3. Today, the PUF provides funds to 27 UT and A&M institutions that collectively enroll nearly 400,000 students. Funding from the PUF is used to build classrooms, labs, hospitals, and clinics that are needed to educate the state's future workforce, conduct research, and provide healthcare to millions of patients. Over the last century, university lands has not only helped educate Texans and keep them healthy, the lands have also provided efficient energy. The UT system is proud of this rich legacy, but also focused on tomorrow. As stewards of the lands that have given so much to Texas, the UT system is committed to a future that nurtures and sustains such a treasured resource, driving cleaner and better energy technologies forward to power Texas and beyond. Undoubtedly, university lands will continue to uplift the Lone Star State in its next century of innovation, making new discoveries, caring patients, and training tomorrow's workforce in PUF-funded facilities, enabling future chapters to be written in this incredible story of our Texas treasure, the university lands.
So that gives you a little perspective of, of all that has, become of this very simple idea that oil and gas might be in West Texas. Let's see if I can.
From the beaches and
Let's see if I get this to. I always have a little trouble. There we go. So, any questions to this point, Cindy?
Oh no, I'm just fascinated. I love it.
Okay.
I love all of it.
Well, so I've kind of self-styled as the Men of Santa Rita, and so I want to call out special attention to about 5 individuals. So Johann Uden was the University of Texas geology professor and later became the state geologist under the banner of the Bureau of Economic Geology there at Austin. But he had speculated that the Marathon Fold which it might extend from the Marathon Mountains down south, might go as far northward as Reagan County, and that there was potential for, structural oil traps and things like that, the way they thought about it back then. And there'd also been oil seeps that had been observed along the Pecos River in that area. So tests had been done on the eastern shelf of the Permian Basin, but then it commenced and went further to the west. So again, some of the very specific individuals that were really involved on the ground with this. The first individual I'd like to kind of highlight here is Rupert Ricker. He was a gentleman that was raised on a ranch there in Reagan County. He joined the military and became a captain in the Army. And as fate would work out, he became acquainted with an individual named Frank Pickerel while he was in the Army. But he graduated from UT Law in 1915. He came back to Big Lake and began practicing his legal practice there in Reagan County. And then in 1919, he made a preliminary application for what they call an exploration permit on tracts of university lands. In fact, not a small area at all, 674 square miles. So he had big ambitions, and the way this permit worked, you could get a permit and then explore, and if you discovered oil in paying quantities, then you could go back to the General Land Office, which administered these lands at that time, and request a lease. But there was a filing fee of 10 cents an acre. $43,000 was going to be due in 30 days. So Mr. Ricker went to Fort Worth to, just like oil and gas works now, you got to go raise money to try to get a drilling prospect going. And wasn't having much luck, as the story is told, and ran into his old Army buddy, Frank Pickerel, in Fort Worth. Now, Frank Pickerel had left the Army, and he was a banker and a businessman in El Paso. And he had coalesced with a business partner named Haman Krupp, who was a mercantile manager and owner there in El Paso. And they were, intrigued, and I guess that maybe had talked about, maybe doing some drilling, prospecting. So as it turns out, Ricker sold his application to Pickerel and Krupp for $2,500, and yet, the filing fee had yet to be paid. And so as we move on to the next very significant individual in this is Frank Pickerel. Again, he became a banker and businessman in El Paso. He partnered up with Haman Krupp in El Paso to purchase the mineral lease from Rupert Ricker. They collectively formed the Texan Oil and Land Company. And as the history reads, Pickerel was immediately sent from Fort Worth to West Texas, to Reagan County. Where in the world is this place? To go lay eyes on. Yeah, okay, it's really out here, and that sort of thing. And then Haman Krupp had connections in New York, and that's told in several ways. But he immediately went to New York to try to raise money again, to try to raise money to pay the filing fee, and they ultimately didn't sell a lot of stock, but they came up with an idea to sell certificates in a drilling prospect for $200 each. And during that time, some of the stock salesmen that Pickerel had trained enticed or got a group of Catholic women interested in this investment. They made an investment, but then they began to get a little nervous about it. And so we'll read this statement in Pickerel's own words here in just a moment. But I do believe it's very notable to think that, here in Midland, we have the Permian Basin Petroleum Museum, and they acknowledge many of the pioneers in the industry. But Frank Pickerel was the first member inducted into the Petroleum Museum Hall of Fame in 1968. And I think that's very appropriate. And let me just say this, Cindy. Now you get into a little bit of debate, but the Santa Rita well was not the very first well drilled in the Permian Basin. There's a W.H. Abrams well, which was drilled about 100 miles east of there in Mitchell County in 1921. The W.H. Abrams well made only about 10 barrels a day. And then we go ahead 2 years, and the Santa Rita came in, made 100 barrels a day. And so it's described as the, quote, first commercial well in the Permian Basin, and really enthused the excitement and ambitions to go out there. But this, I think this is a very neat thing. We've heard, anecdotal stories that it was nuns and things like this, but just as a group of Catholic women. But in Pickrell's own words, he says the name Santa Rita really originated in New York. Some of the stock salesmen had encouraged a group of Catholic women to invest in the Group 1 certificates. These women became a little worried about the wisdom of their investment and consulted their priest. He apparently also was somewhat skeptical and suggested that the women invoke the aid of Santa Rita, who was the patron saint of the impossible. As I was leaving New York on one of my subsequent trips to the field, 2 of these women handed me a sealed envelope and told me that the envelope contained a red rose that had been blessed by the priest in the name of the saint. The women asked me to take the rose back to Texas with me to climb the top of the derrick and scatter the rose petals, which by then were dry, over the rig, and to say, I hereby christen thee Santa Rita. And I faithfully followed those instructions. So in his own words, that's the story. So I just think that's pretty neat, and especially to have the quote directly from him. Haman Krupp was, again, enthusiastically busy in El Paso. He was the co-founder of the Texon Oil and Land Company. He went to New York, and again, he had connections there. They never did sell enough stock certificates to even pay the filing fee, so Haman Krupp had to borrow the money to pay that $43,000 and to secure the lease rights. He was known for his generosity and is acknowledged as the most distinguished citizen of El Paso and the most useful citizen of Texas, which is a pretty auspicious title. And he's ultimately enrolled in the El Paso Hall of Honor. But he was inducted into the Permian Basin Petroleum Museum Hall of Fame in 1969. So anyway, very significant participant in this whole idea. The next person I'd like to describe here is Carl Cromwell, who was known as the Big Swede. He was the driller for the Santa Rita #1. He was coincidentally born in Seabrook, Pennsylvania, which is only not many miles from where Colonel Drake drilled his first oil well in 1865. I think that's a little bit interesting the way life works out. Just a few thoughts here. Carl Cromwell was tasked with, okay, you've got to go find some drilling equipment and some people to help you get this done. And so they finally did that. And then, he lived out there with his wife and little girl. Now, Cindy, didn't you say that
Yes.
Carl's granddaughter?
Yes. Yes.
And that's such a neat thing, because the daughter Carlene, I don't know if that's the mom, but she was on the ground out there. And again, they hired a derrick builder, after they got the well kind of spud, derrick builder, and then they built these 2, what they call these shotgun boxcar shacks, and one for the Cromwells and one for the tool dresser and any other hands he could rustle up out there. But after the well came in, Cromwell became the drilling superintendent of the Texon Company in that rapidly expanding field around Santa Rita. And he also acquired his own leases and became known as an honest and generous and free-spirited wildcatter. And then he was subsequently inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1970. So again, quite appropriate. Just to kind of roll back through some of the facts here, 1919 was when the application for oil and gas exploration permits were let. And then August 23 of 21, just 4 hours prior to the expiration of the permit, the historic Santa Rita #1 was spud in Section 2, Block 2 of University lands. Just a little side story you and I spoke about the other day, one of the requisites of the drilling permit was once you spud a well, you have to get, unassociated witnesses to verify and affirm that you had done that. So as it is, this was in the middle of the night, and the story is that Frank Pickrell, realized, so we got this going now. I need to find somebody. Where am I going to find anybody here on the Bald Prairie? And happened to look up, and you may know, I'm sure you know, Cindy, this well is only a quarter mile off of what's now Highway 67. I'm sure in those days it was probably just kind of a two-rut road. We saw some headlights and made his way out there to the road and flagged down his car. Happened to be a couple of cowboys that were on their way to town and not looking for any detours, I'm sure, but he persuaded them to come to the well site and see what he was doing, and then further convinced them to carry him to San Angelo in their car and go to the county clerk's office so we could get an affidavit to this event. The cowboys it's described that they thought they were, kind of, getting into something that might not be so honest, and they were a little leery of this, but they ultimately had to call an attorney in that next morning to convince them that no, everything's okay, and so they agreed and affirmed that Pickrell and Cromwell were doing what they said they were doing. But the well drilled for 646 days, just a little over 21 months, and to a depth of 3,055 feet. And in the early morning of May the 28th, 1923, the well came blowing in over the derrick as the first well drilled on university lands, and subsequently, as we know now, transformed the Permian Basin from then on. But the first royalty payment that was made to the university, a little over $500, and happened on August the 24th. That's actually the date that the university received the funds, and the well produced for about 67 years, so quite auspicious. I've looked back at our records to see if I could, how much production, and you may know that in Texas, production is recorded at the Railroad Commission by lease, and so how much production has that lease, delivered, and I can only see the records back to 2005 internally, and I can tell you since that time, it's delivered just a little over 2 million barrels of oil equivalent and about $20 million in royalty to the university. So again, that's just the last, number of years. But anyway, as we look forward here, these are a couple of documents. It's been quite interesting to me, just like yourself finding me, Cindy. In the last 2 months, I've had people that I don't know show up and say, "Hey, look at this, Richard," and give me documents. We have a landman that's going through some historical documents that have been stored at an offsite storage, actually in Lubbock, and he came across these documents. This, as I mentioned, is a drilling permit, exploration permit, and if you found oil, you had to notify the General Land Office of that fact and that you wanted a lease. And this is the notice. Oops, this is the notice back to the General Land Office. I, Haman Crump, owner of oil and gas permit number 3955, and that's still the way we carry it today, covering sections 1, 2, 11, and 12, Block 2, University or State University lands located in Reagan County, acting herein by Frank Pickrell, the duly authorized agent and manager, hereby report that oil in paying quantities is being produced from a well drilled upon the above mentioned and described surveys, and which well is located and situated upon Section 2, Block 2 of the mentioned surveys, and that the oil in paying quantities was struck May the 28th, 1923. And since said time, oil has been produced in paying quantities from said well upon said land, and that I accompany this application with a log of said well, and the correctness of which is sworn by Carl G. Cromwell Drilling. I hereby apply for an oil and gas lease for 10 years, subject to the renewal or renewals upon the above described survey. Pray that said lease be issued forthwith to me. And it's signed by Frank Pickrell. Just, again, another beautiful handwriting here. Just and this is the original document. And then over here, Cindy, is the first royalty payment that went to the university, and you can see here it says it goes from oil run from Haman Crump lease, University or Reagan County, June, and it says past July. Okay, so it was kind of you know, hybrid time there, but from this lease, and they show how much oil was produced into the pit, and then how much oil was sold, and then total barrels down here. I'm amused by this. Here's your 1/8 royalty, 21.37 barrels. This was sold to one entity up here. $1.75 a barrel was the going rate. Here's $37. So again, it's just these very historical documents. And then, the community of Texon sprung up around this whole thing. And as you may know, there many people moved into that area. And again, I've kind of described this, and this was 1923. And if we read our history books, we know that, the Depression was not far behind that. And this Texon, oil and land company, they started this little community out there. And it became quite an oasis, I think, in a very hard time of the world. And so they had lots of nice things. They had housing for the workers and for the superintendents and the foremen. They had a public school, had a baseball team, had the rail went right through there. This is a picture of the Big Lake Harmonica Band. Okay, now just imagine 25 harmonicas kind of tuning up. I suspect that would, but and one of the things I think occurred during that time, if you read the history, Texon was very much controlled. And let me just say this, that they had a gentleman named Levi Smith come in, and he sort of managed that town. And you had to get permission from Levi Smith to come and visit, come and go. But they had, like I said, they had a swimming pool, they had a golf course, and they just had these modern things. And much like today, I believe that was all just, described with the baseball team and everything. Go back to the Northeast to raise money. Look, we've got this wonderful operation down here, all the modern conveniences that, that you would expect. And, it's a very, going concern. And in an effort to raise the money. But there's lots of stories about these baseball players. Every oil company had their own baseball team, apparently, and they would match those up. And I think they had some real ringers in here. They weren't necessarily the best workers, perhaps, but they could play baseball. But anyway, let's move forward to now, 100 years later, and just some of the metrics of university lands. If you look at the size and scope, again, it's about 185 miles north-south and 375 east-west, and it's these big consolidated blocks is a real blessing to the university, because we not only control the minerals but the surface as well. And so it really gives us great dominion and great authority over what happens on these lands. Presently, we have about 270 plus oil and gas operators that operate on university lands. There's just about everything you might imagine. There's some numbers here, as you see, but there's 110 grazing leases. There's you see 1.4 million acres is presently developed or leased for mineral development production. 95,000 acres of renewable energy leases. There's been over 26,000 wells drilled all in. There's lots of pipelines, infrastructure, power lines, everything you might imagine to be infrastructure for these operations. There's currently about just a little over 10,000 wells that are being produced. And then there's about 19,000 acres of surface leases. We've got everything on these lands, from public schools to wind farms, solar farms. We've got, like I said, there's probably 35, 40,000 cattle, sheep, and goats grazing at any one period of time out there. And then, the most magnificent thing, I think, of the 75 to 100 barrels a day that the Santa Rita came in at. Our current production is 356,000 barrels of oil equivalent per day right now. It's just absolutely indescribable what has happened. And then not just this, but think of all the Permian Basin and how Texas has benefited from that very beginning. So if you look at the Permian University Fund, and you may know this, but the Permian University Fund was established as an endowment for the benefit of higher education. And so all the revenues, mineral revenues that are generated from these lands go into the endowment. And that endowment is distributed a very minute rate, 5 to 7% per year to the two universities, UT and A&M. But it supports 21 institutions, 6 state agencies from A&M, like, the AgriLife, the county agents, and all those different programs. There's almost 400,000 students between the two schools. The market value of the PUF is up in the billions, as you see. The distributions from the PUF annually is very modest. And so you think about this, if you put $1 into the PUF, but you're only distributing it, let's just say it's 5% a year, it's going to take you 20 years to get that dollar value back out. Now that dollar is going to continue to deliver revenue on a go-forward basis, but it was intended to accumulate and grow to support this. But in 2/3 go to UT, 1/3 to A&M. There's a whole backstory on that and a lot of politics, I'm sure. But the fund is managed by UTEMCO, which is the University of Texas Investment Management Company. But if you look at this area out here, you kind of put just a shape on the map. It's about the size of Alabama as far as square miles that we have to cover here. And then all the distributed education that you see throughout the state, is, and really as Texans, we're all direct or indirect beneficiaries of this. If you look closely at university lands on a day-to-day basis, we had there's a state economist, I say a state economist, he was nominated for a Nobel Prize, so maybe a bit more prestigious than that. Ray Perryman did an economic study for us a few years ago. We always knew what monies, were deposited into the PUF, but how does that cascade across the counties? The university lands is located in 19 different counties in West Texas. And so, he does all these, economic models and determined that about 7,400 full-time people make their living every day on university lands. And then intermittently throughout the day, there are thousands and thousands more, from truck drivers and fuel delivery people, pipe and all these different things that occur out there every day. And then annually, since 2012, commercial activity on PUF lands has generated these kinds of numbers: $3.5 billion of GDP, lots of indirect jobs, 176 million in state tax revenues, and then a lot of local tax revenues. And this is something that I found very, very meaningful to me, that the public school, there's all these ISDs that are in the 19 counties, benefit to the tune of about $16 million a year from the ad valorem taxes that are paid by university lands or by the state on behalf of university lands. So lots of strong ranching heritage, as you could well imagine, and from 1876 until 1923, it's just mostly grazing, and you heard, on the video, very modest revenues during those windows of time. But we've got families that have been on these lands since its inception, their different generations, and it's been it's a very unique opportunity to operate and manage some of these lands, but we leverage these families and these people that are out there working the land in the agricultural sector, because they will tell you this feels like our land. They know it's not. They know it's leased land, but they're very protective of it. If something's not appropriate, they're going to let us know very quick. But this gentleman right here, Bode Owens, this lady right here, they were all born on university lands, and they're all gone these days, but quite a strong heritage. And then if you kind of look forward, again, just all sorts of infrastructure out there. And you might think it's pretty crowded out there, but it's still pretty spread out. But again, public schools, all manner of oil and gas infrastructure, livestock, we've got a groundwater management plan. And in more recent years, we've gotten into this, renewable energy footprint. And we got I looked at yesterday, 12 different projects of renewable energy. And there's lots of conversation about the energy transition, kind of moving into that space. And so we're into that somewhat. Obviously, with this much land and this many activities, you've got to have a very diligent environmental stewardship, mindfulness. And so we look at everything from spills to emissions and groundwater management, utilization, all the natural resources. And our goal is really, we have two really targeted, guiding thoughts, is to make money and to protect these assets and resources, great or small. And that's what we go about every day. We really, as employees of University Lands, we're here to promote and protect these lands 24/7. And so that's what we do. Just to give credit where credit's due, I didn't just divine all this stuff out of thin air. I've done quite a lot of reading. I wanted to point you to this couple of references. The current Permian Basin Oil and Gas magazine is published by the Permian Basin Oil and Gas Association here in Midland. They've got a wonderful short article this month in the May edition about the Santa Rita. It tells a lot of things that I just described. And then this, certainly Texas History Historical Association Online is tells a lot about the Santa Rita, and then the Petroleum Museum and their Hall of Fame. But this book right here by Martin Schwetman is a book that's out of print, and it's where I got most of the information I was able to report about this. And it can be found on Amazon. You just have to kind of look for it. And anyway, it's great, short read, takes you about an hour to read through it and everything, but it tells about these individuals. So with that, I'd love to answer any questions or fill any gaps, or sure I've skipped over some things.
Great. Well, why don't we take down the screen share for now?
Okay.
So I can see your face and they can see us a little better.
Okay. Does that work?
Yes. That was a wonderful presentation.
No,
So
thank you.
I'm going to give you my personal experience with the Santa Rita.
Yeah, please.
Why it was so intriguing to me.
Okay.
My son went to UT
Okay.
to get his petroleum engineer degree. My husband has been drilling oil wells since the 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went there, I saw the Santa Rita pump was sitting on the campus.
Yeah.
And that was my first question. Why is the pump here when the discovery was all the way out in Big Lake?
Right.
So I started doing some investigating on the story of the Santa Rita. And I learned what you just described, the royalties. Cha-ching, 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 cha-ching.
I know it.
No wonder the pump is on the UT campus. Then I went in, there's a man named Gus Clemens. He's a wonderful historian in San Angelo. And he has a book that he wrote on the history, and part of it is on the Santa Rita.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard the story of Rupert wanting to drill the well and talking to Frank Pickerel, and then getting with his buddy Krupp, and then going to New York. And so on a personal level, I realized that while all this was going on, that's where my maternal family is, from El Paso, Texas.
Oh, really? Okay.
My mother was actually born there. So my grandmother was a teenager when all of this was going on.
Mm-hmm.
So I liked that. I was raised Catholic. So that interested me too, because of the whole saint thing. You pray to different saints.
Right.
This saint for this and this saint for this. But when I heard about the petals and Frank Pickerel actually going up there, because the Irish are very superstitious.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't not going to do that. Can you imagine him climbing up that derrick, throwing those rose petals, because these women had this rose blessed by a priest?
Right.
You've got to do this. You've got to Christian it. You got to do it.
Yeah.
So that interested me. But what really interested me is the story itself of perseverance that these men went through, because they didn't really know what they were doing. Krupp and Pickerel, they knew they had something maybe, but they really didn't know what they were doing. So some kind of invisible force was guiding these men.
Yeah.
And the three key men were Cromwell, Pickerel, and Krupp, of course.
Right.
For knowing it. I learned that well equipment that you talked, they had to get a hole in the ground.
Yes, right.
They went, oh my gosh, what do you mean? The lease is almost up? What do you mean?
Yeah.
So I think they did that from San Angelo. They got some water well equipment and they brought it up there. Then I heard that the prospective location was like 3,000 feet, like more than half a mile on the train track, and they didn't have time. In those days, they only had horses and.
Yes, right.
So they drilled it 185 feet from the train track itself.
That's
so
exactly right.
It didn't even get drilled. And I believe that I heard later that they did drill there where the initial perspective was, and there wasn't anything there.
Yeah,
so I love that part of the story.
Yeah.
And then the two headlights showing up at exactly the right time.
Yeah, no, you just can't imagine. Yeah.
That's a miracle. That is a miracle. So in my world and in everybody's world, how many times have we started something and we give up?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And Cromwell never gave up. They never gave up. A year and a half of dropping this tool. Boom,
No.
boom, and it would only really do what, a couple of feet a day.
Well, yeah, but it averaged a little over 4.5 feet a day.
Yeah.
21 yards, you know. Yeah.
For
right.
a year and a half.
Yeah.
And if anybody's ever been to Big Lake or Texon, they know that there are times in our year, in that year and a half, where weather conditions are horrid, hot, or dusty, or whatever. And they lost a lot of their crew. Would just say, I'm not doing this anymore.
Right.
But they kept on. They actually, I believe they finally did build a regular derrick, right? And so that happened after the water well equipment.
Yeah, right.
And then they're sitting in their house or whatever, eating breakfast, and they hear this psst. And they thought, I think somebody said it might have been a snake or something.
Yeah, they thought it
got louder and louder and louder, and then went boom. Oh my gosh, can you imagine what that was? So a year and a half of this miracle, this prayer, this belief, this understanding. To me, this is a story of perseverance and not giving up. Because I believe they only had a short time even after the year and a half. Didn't they? I was like, oh gosh, we're running out of time here. Right?
Yeah, they got the well spud, and as long as they kept drilling and didn't stop, and they could carry it forward. But yeah, I think endurance is another word. I mean, something that I read that Mrs. Cromwell, I believe she was kind of the glue that kept everything together out there on the ground.
Exactly.
She said that there's the gentleman that leased the university lands for grazing was a gentleman named O.W. Parker, and some of his cowboys would come by and they furnish horses to move equipment and things like that. And she said in her it's kind of wasn't overly emotional, but you could just see that the cowboys were empathetic because here's these two men, a woman, and a little girl out there on this old rough prairie, and kind of are you sure? And you can imagine. I mean, they just probably right away shaking their head,
But they never gave up.
Yeah, they never gave up.
And so I'll go on a spiritual level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
God always says yes to us,
Yes.
something better.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like, well, so, but you got to recognize those miracles.
Yes.
So if you have a miracle that shows up in your journey of perseverance, in my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
and in this case, it was it was several,
Yes.
just several little miracles. Don't give up,
Right. Right.
because it will come in when it's supposed to come in.
Uh-huh. I agree.
And like I said, it's either that or something better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In my understanding of the way that God works
Blesses us. Yes.
and
Mm-hmm.
blesses us. Then I got to thinking, a lot of people think that oil is just about gasoline. Oh gosh, no. If you have anything plastic,
Anything. I mean, most of the things.
plastic, pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, the list is pretty endless of what oil,
Mm-hmm.
what petroleum, Vaseline.
It enables this life that we enjoy. Yeah.
Exactly. So oil is a huge part of our lives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then I think it's also interesting to think about all of the people, the millions and millions and millions and millions of people that have been affected because of the Santa Rita well.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah. Sure.
All of the jobs, all of the products, all of the students that have gone to UT.
Yeah.
And then also, I wasn't born in Texas. My mother was in El Paso.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in California.
Okay.
And in Southern California, I'm a beach girl. I was that. And then I wrote that song, Jose Cuervo.
Yeah. I listened to it last night.
And then ended up with a cowboy, oil man, and came to Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And when I came to Texas, I kept thinking, what's going on with these people? Why are my kids saying the Texas, at school, they do the Pledge of Allegiance and the pledge to the Texas flag. And the loyalty and patriotism that Texans have for Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And then knowing that it was a country in its own, because Texas is so unique from the rest of the country. It has its own culture.
Mm-hmm.
It's a mixture of other cultures. But real Texans, I love real Texans because of their loyalty and friendly.
Yeah.
Friendly people.
Mm-hmm.
Not, like I said, not everyone. In the bigger cities, there's a lot of people.
Sure, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But when you're in rural Texas or small town Texas, and they don't tear down their historical things.
Right.
In California, they're tearing everything down to build up more condos and, blah, 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 blah. But not in Texas. There's a real loyalty and a pride there.
Well, there is. Yeah, I think there's a very unique pride. And of course, I think people around the world, if they learn you're from Texas, they want it, they want to talk to you and they want to know more about it.
Exactly. It's got 4 different accents.
Right. Yes, it
West
does.
Texas talks a little slow. East Texas, where I lived for a long time, that's real twangy over there.
Yeah.
And then, there's all these different. It's such a beautiful, eclectic place, and I love in the heart of Texas. Texas itself is just such a beautiful state. And when I would do speeches in Texas, I do that because of my song and that kind of thing.
Yes.
I would say, you're like fish that don't know you're wet. Sometimes it takes an outsider to come in and go, wow, look how friendly it is. Look how awesome this is. Look how patriotic these people are, right?
Yeah, I do agree with that. I do believe that, and I've had other people tell me that, and West Texans in particular, just, they're just naturally friendly. And
naturally friendly and willing to help.
Yeah. Yes. No. That's
willing to help. If they can do something for you, that they can do.
Yeah.
Right.
No, that's for sure. But I agree with your your sentiments on these miracles and the perseverance, because the harder you work, the luckier you get. But to again, to be, I mean, it's one thing for us to look back and say, well, gosh, look at the endurance they had. But to be out there in the moment and the elements, and, we don't have enough water, we don't have enough, provisions, and, it takes a real leap of faith, to kind
A
of.
leap of faith and stamina,
Yes.
integrity,
Yeah.
everything that it takes to be a winner. How do I know? Jose Cuervo was not an overnight success.
I'm sure that's true.
I'm going to tell you, there's a story there too. And I got my own miracles.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's why I appreciate this story so much, because in the way that I see things, when you have God on your side, which the fact it was called the Santa Rita at all, that brings God into the picture. Whether you're Catholic or not, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What it means is that these women were bringing God into the picture.
They brought reverence to God, yes.
We're bringing God into the picture. They do, in the Catholic religion, they like to do that with saints and different things like that. But it doesn't matter how you bring God into something.
That's true.
When you bring God into something, expect a big winner if you don't give.
Yep. That's correct.
What I love about the Texas story of the Santa Rita #1.
Yeah. Oh, great. Yeah.
And
well said.
And when you drive to Midland from San Angelo, you got all these little, we used to call them grasshoppers.
Yeah.
And down in Southern California, where I am, I mean, we're right there by the La Brea tar pit. So we used to call them grasshoppers,
Yes, right.
And every time you say it, cha-ching.
Right. Right.
So on a personal level, because my son went to UT and got his engineering degree, and my family was from El Paso, and then just living in San Angelo, that became a boom town.
Yes, oh sure.
Right. And they had to get that oil somehow, right?
Well, and it's I mean, and certainly the Permian Basin since 2009, when the horizontal drilling and the unconventional shale play kind of kicked off, certainly, I mean, it's phenomenal how this place has grown, and we've got so many people that come into this area to work, and it's really thriving, and really, it's a strategic asset for the United States, this Permian Basin area, and you kind of ink all that back to the Santa Rita.
Yes, my husband actually told me that this, because of the Santa Rita, the Allies during World War II had plenty of fuel.
Yes, right. No, that's absolutely right.
Right, and so that's important to know. We're all connected. We are all God's children. We're all connected. And when you can embrace each other's cultures, embrace each other's dreams, and say, good for you, good for you, good for you. I just think that's such a beautiful thing.
Well, it is, and that's really, I mean, my simple life philosophy. We're here to help each other.
That's right.
That's really what we're here for.
That's right. When you get out of what's in it for me and go into what's in it for us.
Yes, sure.
It's a completely different understanding. And it's all about that. Look how many people.
Oh,
it's endless.
You can't comprehend. We can't comprehend. Even like the student head count at the universities today. I mean, that's every year, and since 100 years previous. It's grown obviously, but think of the families, the extended families, and just can't even imagine. And then that we've not even spoken about like MD Anderson and all the healthcare benefits that have been derived as a result.
The same.
Yes.
MD Anderson, no kidding.
MD Anderson is part of the University of Texas. Yes.
No kidding.
Yeah. The UT Southwestern in Dallas, and it's like I said, 21 institutions, about 14 universities, and the balance of those are healthcare institutions.
So now we're into saving lives.
Yeah, saving lives. Yeah, that's exactly right. All the ways that I mean, our medical system, it has its challenges, but I just had a shoulder replaced the other day at Dallas, and it, I'm 1 month out of that, and it's just doing great. And what a blessing to be able to have that opportunity just to be able to get that done.
And the research.
Yeah, research, and I've had the privilege to visit MD Anderson, the Health Science Center at Houston, and learn more about nuclear medicine and all those kinds of things that pretty foreign to me, but it's amazing.
It is. It all started somewhere, and
yes,
right, and right. So this discovery, the Santa Rita #1, is the nucleus to so many different things.
It is, yeah.
Especially, and it spreads and it spreads and it spreads.
Promulgated million ideas, yeah.
I would love to see our whole United States. Somebody asked me the other day, "Are you red or are you blue?"
Yeah.
And I said, "I'm purple." Okay.
Yeah. I
want everybody to get along. This is what this United States is about. There's a word in that, united.
Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. I agree.
United and patriotism is so important. The spirit of patriotism, which just, I don't know any other state where their kids do the pledge of allegiance.
Yeah.
In Texas.
State pledge, yeah. No, we did that growing up, and I pray they still do it today. But it's I don't have any school-aged kids right now, but it again, the unity that you saw in our nation, particularly World War II, and the young men and women patriots that were called from their farms and homes into a foreign land and did that without blinking an eye. And then the support that they got at home is just that's what we're made of, and that's where we really come from. But
and finding solutions. My father worked for Standard Oil.
Yeah, okay.
As we were growing up in California at the refinery.
Mm-hmm.
And he started the ocean cleaning project.
Oh, yeah, okay.
He did. And he invented an oil skimmer. And the oil skimmer cleaned up a lot of the oil during the Valdez spell.
Oh, really? Is that right? Well,
so he was in charge of cleaning the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, and somewhere in there, dolphins started showing up down there and in Redondo, where I grew up. And right, so and then they actually have a brand new boat, and they named the boat after my dad.
Oh, is that right? And what's the name?
The Duke J.
How about that?
Thanks for Jordan.
Yeah.
His name was Duke, right?
Oh,
so they called it the Duke J in honor of his cleanup. And then my grandfather was in the oil business. Daddy also worked on oil rigs. And then his dad was in the Philippines, but was captured by the Japanese, and that didn't turn out. Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
Lost him.
Yeah.
But I have in my whole family, and then I married one, right?
sounds like you've not gotten far from it.
And I'll tell you, married to a wildcat oil man, right?
Yeah.
When you get a well that blows out, that is no fun.
No, it's not. It's not. And it's the way I like to describe it is that the oil industry is a group of people that solve problems every day. They solve this problem, go to the next problem. It's just never ending. But again, in the 70s and previous years, it was not as wildcatting, describes it. It's a little bit more rough around the edges than some of the things these days, for sure.
Yeah, right now they're a little bit more sure what they can do.
Yeah. It's kind of rinse and repeat now.
But that's the Wild West, isn't it?
It is.
That's the
It is.
spirit of the Wild West. Is
Yeah. No,
let's
just,
do it
you know,
anyway. Let's
roll the dice and let's see how it works.
Yep. So
And that's, you know, you look at all the many men and women that have been inducted in the Petroleum Museum Hall of Fame, and they're all, you know, in hard charging, you know, can't keep me down kind of people, you know.
exactly.
And it's neat. It's neat.
Exactly. Well, I have so enjoyed this, and
Well, thank
very,
you.
very grateful to you for bringing this story to
Well,
my listeners, and I will be sharing this with a lot of people.
okay. Well, it's been my pleasure. It's a you know, I've been here. I don't know that I mentioned this. I've been with University of Lands 25 years, and it's been a great blessing to me to be responsible for these lands and to care for them. And because there's really no other entity in the world that has a land asset like this, and so it's been a very, very rich blessing for me.
Exactly. And my husband was always very proud when they would drill. He would say, "We always leave that land looking better
Better, yeah.
than the way we found it." You know,
Absolutely.
you know,
Absolutely.
that's
Yeah,
very important. You don't just go do it.
Yeah.
With a mess.
yeah, the natural, you know, care of the natural resources is just, you know, it's always been important, but there's more of a focus on it these days than at any time in history, I believe. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
well, thank you, Sandy.
I will be seeing you in Big Lake,
Okay.
100th year celebration.
Yeah,
This
that'll
is
be
it,
great.
100 years.
All righty. All right.
All right,
Thank you so very much.
much.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.